Thank you for joining us today for a presentation about Good Grief, a New Jersey-based nonprofit that builds resilience in children, strengthens families, and empowers communities to grow through loss and adversity. Our presenter, Evelynn Moon, is the Director of Education for Good Grief, where she curates a monthly webinar containing education for the greater Good Grief community, among other outreach and support. Today's session is getting recorded, and slides and resources will get shared later this week with registered attendees. My name is Crystal Hooper, and I am NJALA's treasurer and moderator for today's event. Please take a moment to check that your microphone is muted. Any questions can get typed into the chat box, and I will keep track of them to ask Evelynn at the end of her presentation. Without further ado, let me hand the controls over to Evelynn. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. Thank you for that introduction. Good morning and welcome, everyone. I just want to start from a place of gratitude. I'm so grateful for your time, for your attention, and just for the opportunity for us to all be together today. Today's topic is broadly about supporting loss and adversity. And I also want to tell you all about the services and programs of Good Grief and to provide you with a few tools that might hopefully help you to support grief and grievers in your lives. So let's dive in. Since we're spending a little bit of time together, just wanted to put up a few fun facts. My name is Evelynn Moon. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the Director of Education at Good Grief. I've been working with social emotional learning focused programming for over a decade now. And some other fun facts are I'm a mom. I have an 8, but she would let you know soon to be 9-year-old next week. I'm a product of New Jersey public schools, K through 12. I'm a 3rd generation Rutgers graduate. I did hop across the river for my master's. I went to NYU. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. So if there's any fellow Star Wars fans here, may the force be with you all. You know, old Star Wars, new Star Wars, Lego Star Wars. I like it all. And I feel like this crowd might appreciate this. I am obsessed with reading thrillers and suspense novels, even though they keep me up at night. It's like, I don't know, it's like eating junk food. Like I just have to see what happens next and I tear through them way too fast. So it is not good nighttime reading material, but I love it. Before we dive in, I want to sort of introduce you to this concept of ritual that we follow at Good Grief. Ritual is our way of checking in with ourselves or checking in with others. We use them to help manage transitions at our centers. And in any session that we're doing, we're all coming from somewhere. We've all had mornings before this. We're all going off to something afterwards. And part of ritual on our nights of support, which I'll tell you more about in a moment, is to always start with sort of grounding ourselves and landing in this space together and checking in. At the end of our session, I'll also do a closing ritual to help honor our time together and start that transition out of our session and into the rest of your day. So this is a little bit of a two-parter. First, I'm going to ask us to just take 3 deep breaths, just in through your nose, out through your mouth. You don't have to time it with me, just 3 deep breaths and really try to feel how you're seated in the chair. So we're just going to do 1, 2. I know you can roll your eyes and go, oh my gosh, what is breathing going to do? But I find that if you really lean into it, I always feel a little bit more calm, a little bit more centered. And it's one of our favorite tools that we talk about with our families because you don't need to go anywhere. You don't need special tools. You don't need anything to access your breath and sort of find yourself in a present moment. All right, well, here's the second part. You will need to use the chat. I would like to know your name, your location, and I know we said we weren't going to talk about the weather, Crystal, but but weather that describes your mood. So not necessarily the weather that's outside right now, but what is some weather that describes your mood today? I'm going to put mine in the chat. And that location can be your town, your work location, whatever that means to you. Lots of sunny, optimistic, sunny and calm. We got a little overcast. Little foggy. Oh, more sunny friends. Oh, big fluffy clouds. I love that imagery. Thank you for that, Nancy. So just hold on to that weather, how you're feeling this morning. It's good for us to be in touch with how we're arriving at a session like this. And I just want to encourage you to take care of yourself. I am from a children's grief support org, and we talk about things like death, dying, and grief, and that can be hard. So if you need to stand up, stretch, grab a drink of water, there's no judgment here. Whatever you need to do, I trust you to do what's best for yourself. So these are today's topics. I am going to raise some awareness around the services that Good Grief provides. We want to identify some of the various losses and adversities that people face, their impact on behaviors, learning, relationships, and overall well-being. We'll look at the multidimensional nature of the grief experience. And I do want to leave you with some tools, just some strategies for responding with empathy and compassion when supporting grief and grievers. So I am from Good Grief. Our mission is to build resilience in children, strengthen families, and empower communities to grow from loss and adversity. So for those of you who maybe are new to us and what we do, we are a nonprofit organization. We're based here in New Jersey. We've been around since 2004. And for most of our history, we have been providing completely free and unlimited peer support programming to grieving children and their families, starting at 3 years old, all the way through young adulthood. We like to joke and say we support ages 3 to 30, although there is a 31-year-old in one of our young adult groups, and we're not going to tell them to leave. If they feel like they still need us, we are there for them. We do this primarily in our 2 centers. We have one in Morristown, New Jersey. I'm currently seated in our Princeton, New Jersey location, and we offer our peer support programming over Zoom virtually. So we have an adult and young adult night, as well as a night for the kids. They're separate. The kids tend to need help from the adults, but really we want to hold the whole family, whether they're in person or at a distance online. But in recent years, our work has been growing. We want to do more education, advocacy. Essentially, we want to take what we do here and bring it outside of the walls of our centers and really put the tools into the hands of professionals, parents, schools, really the broader community, so that they can better support the needs of children and families who are facing loss and adversity. So the 2 key pillars that all of our grief support, and really any of our programs, is built on is this concept of supportive relationships and adaptive skills. So when we look at supportive relationships, these are, of course, things like parents and caregivers in the homes when we're talking about young people, educators, coaches, mentors, whoever those grownups are. So that adult to child support, but also peer support, kids with their peers, young adults with their peers, adults with their peers, who are having not identical, but parallel experiences. And we give our participants opportunities to practice what we call adaptive skills: mindful awareness, emotion regulation, healthy coping, exploring our character, our purpose, empathy, resilience. So they get to try these on, but also see them modeled by the adults in their lives. And we do this all through training. We have a lot of volunteers that sort of make the magic happen here between our 2 centers. I think we have over 200 volunteers. Currently, we just trained 40 new volunteers last weekend, and we provide them with all the tools that they need to essentially run these peer support programs. Our littlest group is ages 3 to 5. Then we have different stages of elementary, middle school, high school, young adult, spousal loss, child loss, and then caregiver groups where we have more grandparents, aunts and uncles, people who are now raising children. So this is a big picture look at our work. Our family support services, those are our nights of support that we do in our centers and online. We have schools programming, summer camp, a yearly in-person institute. We work with different corporations, parents, and then we have something called a youth and funerals initiative. So that's our family support center. I've told you probably everything you need to know about it, but the program is completely free and unlimited. Most families stay with us for about 2 years, but it's not unusual for people to stay longer. We have one family in Morristown who's been there for about a decade. Sometimes people leave and come back. They're always welcome to do that. And we do have some folks who then feel like they want to give back and become facilitators as well when they feel ready to help support other grief and grievers. These are our centers. They're fun. They both have kind of those big old house vibes, very welcoming. I would encourage you, if you're interested, to sign up for one of our tours. We give monthly tours of our centers, and you really get to see how warm and welcoming and sunny of a space it is. We want to provide a bright, clean, welcoming space for these families, because we know that outside of here, things can be really kind of chaotic. So we really want to make things feel good for them when they're here. They're filled with toys, different areas for playing. One of my favorite rooms is the volcano room. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's completely padded, and it's for kids who just need to sort of get that energy out either before or during a night of support and just literally bounce off the walls in as safe a way as possible. But there's art, music, a stage for talent shows, lots of really great things happen here. You know, people say, "Oh, I don't know how you do this work. It sounds so sad," but I think they don't realize that this is also a space where kids can be kids and families can connect with other families who are going through the same thing. And there's a lot of laughter and a lot of joy that happens in these centers. This is our Grief Expression Summer Camp. So this is in partnership with AmeriHealth. It is run in Camp Clover up in Warren, New Jersey. And it's been running for about the last 5 years. It actually started in our parking lot. So it's really grown significantly. And it is 1st to 8th grade children who have this common experience. They don't have to be good grief kids. It is any grieving kid. They're allowed to attend this 1-week summer camp. It has performances, exhibitions, art. This is also free. It's open to all grieving children. We provide a bus from our Princeton location to accommodate families that are more on this end of the state. Teens are able to join as counselors in training, and we're always seeking volunteers to help provide experiences around art and performance and things of that nature with our kids. Our Spring Institute is coming up. I'll tell you more about that at the end when I show you some of our upcoming events, but our Spring Institute happens every March. The Pingree School in Basking Ridge very generously allows us to use their space every year. This year, the theme is on grief and addiction. I think it should be really interesting. It's a Saturday, but I'll tell you more about that at the end. And then this is where I spend a lot of time. I connect with many, many schools inside and outside of New Jersey. Currently, we just got some of our first schools in Massachusetts that have signed up because they want to run grief groups, but we empower schools to implement their own grief groups in-house. We have a social emotional learning curriculum. We provide professional development and then that parent and caregiver education. We've also stepped into the waters of e-learning. So there's some self-paced modules that schools can sign up for. It's really an exciting time to be able to reach people that normally we wouldn't have been able to. And then if you have any questions about good grief, I'll make some space at the end. But now I want to get into a little bit of our content for today. So I think it goes without saying, this has been, the last few years, just been a great time of uncertainty, of stress and loss for many people. And I think this has gone on probably for longer than any of us could have anticipated. I still have this very clear memory of my boss in March of 2020 telling me to bring home 2 weeks worth of work, and then it was going to be everything back to normal. But I don't think we found that to be the case. You know, there's this sense of loss from illness, from death, from loss of health but also related to just the reality that we live in, loss of jobs, businesses, systemic issues, the loss of what we've really known as normal. And normal kind of keeps, it's like a moving goalpost. What does that mean to us? But I think sometimes it's really easy for us to forget that heightened state of stress and uncertainty that we've been living in for a really long time. And that's not to say that we weren't stressed out pre-pandemic. We were. So when you think about where we've landed now, it's kind of mind-blowing. It feels like many of us have been living day to day, waiting for the next set of bad news to roll in. And we can find ourselves stressing about and focusing on things that we may not have any immediate control over. I know doom scrolling is real. It's a stress loop that even I found myself caught up in, just being focused on those things that I have no control over. And then this is a word I made up, but I found that doom scrolling can morph into what I call doom wallowing, where you're done scrolling and then you're kind of sitting with all of this bad news. Whether it's the pandemic or politics, we tend to live in a highly polarized climate, and living in this state of uncertainty can leave us feeling stressed and sometimes guilty about our stress. I don't know if anybody's ever felt that, because you think, oh, other people have it so much worse. And then you feel guilty about feeling stressed, but that doesn't make it any less real. And the stress has consequences, physically, emotionally, mentally, which is why it's so important that we show up with compassion and empathy for others, but also for ourselves. So I want to challenge you to extend that same grace to yourself that we would give to others, because we're all carrying burdens. Anytime you're in a session with me, you're going to hear plugs for self-care and self-compassion. So we know that approximately 1 out of 14 young people will experience the death of a parent or sibling by the age of 18. And this data comes to us from an organization called Judy's House, the JAG Institute. Every year they do what is called the CBEM, which is estimated rates of childhood bereavement. If you are a little bit of a data nerd, this website might be for you, because you can look at national, state, and county levels of bereavement. And it's very interesting, as well as looking at causes of death and trends around there. I will say it has gone up in every category, this most recent report. So what it used to be a little bit different, but every category, whether that's accidents, illnesses, they're all up for these rates of childhood bereavement. And I just want to point out, these numbers are strictly parent or sibling, so it's not taking into account other caregivers and other family members who could be living in the home. This number more than doubles by age 25. So we're looking at 1 out of 7 young people will be bereaved. And we know that most young people, I think New York Life did this study, by the time they are age 20, that 90% of young people will have experienced the death of some significant person in their lives. So when you look back, unless you're part of that 10%, but if you're a part of the 90%, whether it was a friend, a teacher, a mentor, some other relative who's not a parent or sibling, many of us have experienced grief by the time we are age 20. So this is just the national map. Like I said, you can really hone in on their website, but California has the lowest, West Virginia is at the highest. New Jersey is definitely on the lower end there, just looking at the color coding. And at our centers, we do primarily deal with loss from death. And we'll talk about this a little bit, but there are losses that even go beyond just death that this map wouldn't capture for us. But I like to say we can begin at the beginning, and maybe together we could work to understand, what is grief? If you were going to describe grief to another person, how would you describe it? What is the experience of grief? And feel free to hop into that chat. At Good Grief, we like to say we do things popcorn style. So just know I'll never call on anyone And I will never take silence as disengagement, especially when we're talking about something like grief and loss and death. Just because the chat isn't moving, just because nobody's speaking, doesn't mean that they aren't, gaining something. Yeah, it can feel like hopelessness. A roller coaster comes and goes, good days and bad, emptiness, missing the person. Yeah, there's a lack of control for sure. Yeah, that's a good imagery there, like a weight on your chest. Because there's something emotional, but there's also something physical about that image as well. So what is grief? Grief is a multifaceted response to a loss. Many people like to think of grief as a series of stages that you need to go through. And while you may feel any of those 5 stages of grief that Elizabeth Kubler came up with, what we found in our centers is that suggestion of it having a linear trajectory just doesn't resonate with the families that we support. The idea that you sort of move through these steps and stages, and then you're kind of done with grief. Because really, you're never actually done with grief. It's this lifelong process. So grief is a multifaceted response to a loss in your life. And a lot of times it's easy for us to say, oh, grief is sadness. Grief is crying. But grief is more than just that. It's emotional. It lives in your feelings and your emotions. It's intellectual. It's spiritual, whatever that means to you. That's different for everyone. But it's also a physical response in your body. Grief is really felt with your whole self. And grief is universal. It's kind of wild when you think about how this is something that will happen to everyone. But it's also something that we are really not great at talking about. When we talk about how there can be an elephant in the room, we really don't like to think about our own frailty, the fragility of life. We like to kind of act like grief and death is something that happens to other people over there and put it out of our minds, but it is this universal thing. And grief is a natural, healthy coping response. It is not a pathology. There's nothing wrong with you if you're grieving. It is totally normal because grief serves a purpose. Your grief does help us make meaning out of our lives and out of our experiences. So when we say that grief is physical, what do I mean? And you could probably think of a few examples yourself. Think about a time you felt sad or even stressed or lonely. Where does that show up in your body? And that's a real question. If you're feeling grief, if you're feeling sad, loneliness, or just stress, where does that show up for you? Yeah, migraines, headaches. The sleep is a common one. Some people, you're laying in bed and you've got that mental internet browser and there's 14 tabs open and you can't calm down. Or you're on the opposite end. You're just so fatigued. All that you want to do is sleep. Guess eating, either you can't even bear to look at food or you're kind of stress eating everything in sight. Yes, that neck, that back. I get stressed and my shoulders start that slow creep like up towards my ears because it's just so tense in the muscles, the headaches. We'll see stomach aches. We see a lot of stomach aches, especially with the kids that we support here. Sometimes they're not so able to make that connection between the experiences that they're having and some of these physical manifestations. So stomach aches, headaches, that heightened stress response. You've heard of the fight, flight, or freeze. Just being in that heightened state of alert. Oops, did not mean to do that. Here we have our friends from the movie Inside Out. So I don't know if you've seen the movie Inside Out. we love this movie here at Good Grief. It's a really sweet portrayal of growing up, of changing, of gaining things like mixed emotions. And we have our friends from Inside Out showing some of those primary emotions. And we like to say that you feel all of the emotions with grief. Yes, there's sadness. Yes, there's anger. Here we have fear, disgust, and even joy. And sometimes you could feel multiple emotions at the same time. You might feel relief, but then you might feel guilty about feeling relieved. You might feel happy remembering a memory, but also sad because your person is no longer here and it's more bittersweet. And so we like to support all of the emotions of grief. And here at Good Grief, we lean into even the uncomfortable ones, which I think is what makes it such an incredible safe space for our families. It's a place where they don't have to worry about how other people are going to react to their thoughts or their feelings or their experiences. We're able to support all of the emotions of grief here. Grief is also intellectual. There's this part that kind of lives up here for kids and adults too. Experiencing a loss in your life might have you thinking about the really big, difficult questions. Like, what happens after we die? I know my kid has asked me that, and I wish I could give her a solid 100% certain answer, but it's something that we'll think of. For young children, also understanding the reality and the permanence of loss. You might experience cognitive dissonance, distressing or unwelcome thoughts or dreams, some disorientation with your sense of place and time. That grief fog, that brain fog, that is very real for many people. And with kids, you might see some self-blame or some magical thinking. I caused this because this was my fault in some way. So that's something we support our young people with sort of thinking through at different ages and stages. And grief is an intensely spiritual experience. For us, it's all about that meaning-making process. Human beings are really bad at just having something happen and going, oh, okay, that was a thing that happened. We always want to know, what does this mean? How does this impact me? How does this affect my identity moving forward? The spiritual side might have us questioning a higher power or leaning into religious or cultural beliefs for the very first time. But I think the big thing here with the spiritual side is that identity and that sense of purpose. When we talk about how grief is physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual, these are also the buckets that we promote for self-care here at Good Grief. So you're feeling this in all of these quadrants, within your whole self. What are the things that you could do to care for your physical side, your emotional side, your intellectual side, or your spiritual side? I'm not saying you need to leave this session and immediately think of 4 things that you have to do for yourself every day. Some days you might need more in one or the other. But just want to raise up, this is where grief impacts you. This is also the cup that you want to fill up and maintain and sustain for your own wellness. Just checking the chat. Yeah, nearing the anniversary dates of the person lost, that can be really tough. And there's some that we can predict, milestones, anniversaries, birthdays. But then there's other waves of grief that will sneak up on you for a variety of reasons. You smell perfume, you hear a song, something pops up on your calendar, a reminder, you find a sweatshirt. And there's just, in that moment, again, you have to have some of those adaptive skills to be able to care for yourself, to regulate, to know, all right, I just, need to breathe, or I need to remove myself from the situation so I can regulate again. But then there's some that you can predict. You could say, okay, this anniversary is coming up. What can I do to care for myself in this moment? Yeah, thanks for connecting with each other in the chat. So I will say grief and trauma reactions are very unique and they are very subjective. Grief doesn't happen in a vacuum separate from all the other pieces and all the other experiences in your life. I will say no 2 people will respond in the same way. even in the same household. And we've seen this here, even identical twins, same loss, very similar faces, but incredibly different reactions. And there are some factors that will affect how a person grieves: the nature of the loss, the age of the griever, if there was exposure to a violent death or some kind of suffering, if there's been a series of prior losses leading up to it, also the nature of the relationship with the deceased. And that is an interesting one, because we experience that death of all different types of people in our lives. Some are good, some might be a little bit more colorful or not so good. And we can have surprising reactions to the death of people that land anywhere on that continuum. And I think that's really because once someone has died, the possibility for it to be anything else, that door is kind of closed. So sometimes it could be very, very surprising to us. But the nature of the relationship with the person who died does impact the grief. Prior health of the griever, their mental health, their physical health, their culture, their religious traditions, but also, unfortunately, socioeconomic status can impact things because it will also affect your access to support. So I've been talking a lot about grief from death, but can you think of any other types of losses that people experience? So what are some other losses people can have in their lives? Overdoses, loss of job. Yeah, absent family member. Really the loss of any relationship, I think, with that one. Split in family and friendship. Absolutely. Yeah, losing housing. And there's a lot of reasons someone could lose their house, whether it's financial, natural disaster. Sometimes with the kids that we work with, they lose their housing as a secondary loss to a death. A parent or caregiver dies, now they have to move somewhere else. Yeah, changes in personality. I think one that I hear a lot that tends to go unacknowledged is something like pet death, or miscarriages, loss of financial security, things like that. So, beyond loss from death, we face significant loss and adversities every day. And these experiences will impact school with our young people and health and overall well-being at any age. The CDC did something called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, and it found that 75% of all children will experience at least one adverse childhood experience, or ACE. And half of those kids with one ACE will go on to be exposed to at least 3 more. So I think we've seen this. There's this cumulative effect in individuals and families in certain communities. And the key findings from dozens of studies using the original ACE data found that ACEs are quite common, even among middle-class populations. And there is a powerful and persistent correlation between the more ACEs one experiences and the greater the chance of poor outcomes later in life. And this is by no means a comprehensive list, but these are ones that we see frequently in our centers. Things like exposure to addiction, abuse, loss of home, broken relationships, physical and mental health, not just of the griever, but also of other people in the home. If you have a child who's living with someone who has untreated or poorly treated mental or physical health issues, that can impact them. Loss of safety, security, innocence, exposure to domestic violence, incarceration, poverty, neglect, any kind of family separation, whether that's something with migration, incarceration, deployment, and then systemic issues like racism and oppression. And when we're looking at the kids and the families in our centers, we really have to consider the whole picture of an individual's life. They're more than just the experience that brought them to us. So how can we uplift others who are going through these experiences? How do we show up for each other? How do we show up for ourselves? So when we look at people who are going through either grief or some of these other adversities, some common physical reactions, we talked about this before, but those headaches, those stomach aches, the difficulty sleeping, the fatigue, the exhaustion, the decrease or increase in eating. Sometimes when we don't have the full picture of a person's life, these might seem a little mysterious, but when you kind of look under the hood or peel it back a little bit and understand these adverse experiences in their grief, it does start to make a lot more sense. Some common changes in behavior, we might see some fear and nervousness. And this is at any age, anxiety and depression. Who, when you're feeling stressed out or sad, becomes withdrawn? You just don't want to engage with anyone. You don't want them to talk to you. Becoming more impulsive, difficulty concentrating, again, that brain fog, overreacting to situations, just being quick to anger, quick to just sort of get set off a little bit, and maybe become a little bit more aggressive. And when we're thinking about the kids, particularly students in our schools programs or the ones that come to our centers, we find that difficulty concentrating does impact their school performance. They have difficulty retaining or processing information. They become overly reactive to completely normal things that would happen at school, like exams or assignments. And even though I'm not a student, this last one resonates with me. Difficulty making and carrying out plans, even if they are plans that would be good for you and might benefit you. So New York Life did a study. This is back in 2017, 2018. And they asked a significant number of people how long it felt it took for them to even begin to feel like they were moving forward after experiencing a loss. And they revealed it takes as many as 6 years to feel like you are even beginning to move forward after experiencing a significant loss. But support from family and friends tends to wane within 1 to 3 months. So here we have an image, we have a family at the center, and we are great at this beginning part. I mean, just think about it. The phone calls, the texts, the flowers, sympathy cards, casseroles, all of that stuff. But then as you get out a little further, the 3 to 6, the 6 to 12, and beyond, there's still a few people. But when you think about why that is, it's nothing malicious. I think most people either don't know what to say, they don't know what to do. They might be worried that enough time has gone by, especially with kids, like, oh, well, they seem okay. If I bring it up, they might grieve all over again, or it might harm them. Also, people, they move on with their own lives. The loss is so present for us and sitting with us. Other people, it's not holding space with them the way it does for us. But there's also our own discomfort. I think some of us go, all right, I should reach out. Okay, that's done. Because it's very uncomfortable and that's our stuff. But it doesn't have to be like that. There are things that we can do to help support grief and to support grievers. So how do we do this work? Because it is work. It's an intentional choice. And I'm going to tell you that each of you, have everything that you need to engage in these conversations and support grievers. Because what they need is your true and authentic presence and your ability to listen. And I'm not saying that you have to suddenly play the role of a therapist, but we can support a griever with deep listening, with empathy and compassion, and by bringing our authentic selves. So I got to bring in my guy, Mr. Rogers. I always joke if Good Grief had a mom and a dad, I feel like Fred Rogers would totally be our dad. Our mom might be Brene Brown, I don't know. But he said, the greatest gift you ever give is your honest self. And it might sound cheesy, but you and your authentic self and your willingness and desire to support another person is so critical to this work. And we say that you facilitate the grief experience through intentional conversations. What is facilitation? We say that facilitation is not being the sage on the stage, so it's not the spotlight on you, but the guide on the side. You are not centering yourself and your experiences, but rather you're creating the conditions to allow a conversation with a griever to flow. And this is achieved through listening, empathy, clear language, and those supportive relationships and adaptive skills. So grievers want to be heard. And I think many times it's to the surprise of others, they do actually want to talk about their person who died. And children in particular can be repetitive in their grief. You may find yourself listening to the same story a few times, but that's okay. It's part of our role if we want to support to ensure that they feel heard. I know with our kids, they did an activity in our middle school group and they had sentence stems, like a piece of paper. And it said, I wish the adults in my life would blank. And it was anonymous, but it almost didn't matter because every single piece of paper said the same thing. It said either listen or just listen. It was all the same reply. So grief and grievers, it wants to be heard. And sometimes they're just waiting for someone to open the door and make those conversations okay. Grievers don't want to feel like they're imposing on other people, bringing conversations that'll make them uncomfortable or make other people feel sad in a way that then they have to take care of them. But listening can be such a gift to a griever in your life. At Good Grief, we're also super intentional about how we talk about death and dying. You may have noticed I say dead, death, died, and person who died, because even with children, we do not want to assume and we do not want to impose a relationship onto the griever. We said before, we experience the loss of many different types of people and relationships throughout our lives. So I'd like to encourage you not to attempt to lighten your language around death. As adults, we might feel it is easier to kind of sugarcoat it or use euphemisms. But if you're talking about supporting a child, that can be really confusing. So saying things like, they're in a better place, they've gone to sleep, they're in heaven with the angels now, because kids at certain ages take it really literally. When are they coming back? Why don't we wake her up? Can I go there? And we really want age appropriate, but concrete replies to the extent that, of course, you feel comfortable answering. And the one thing we might do is ignore it or avoid it, but this can be really othering, especially to a child who's experiencing a death in their lives. But what we really need to do is come in from a place of empathy. So I have this very quick video to sort of hone in on this empathy section. This is from Brene Brown. You've probably heard of her, podcaster, author, speaker, all of the things. And I think it just so clearly highlights what the difference is between empathy and sympathy.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
I love that. What makes something better is connection. So this means we don't have to have all of the answers. And hopefully that's a relief to you. If you've been holding on to that assumption that you have to have all the answers or that you should be trying to fix things, you can set that aside right now. Because the only thing that you should be concerned about is trying to be with the person who is in their pain. So that involves sort of 4 key things from that video. The first is perspective taking, understanding that their perspective is their truth. Staying out of judgment, easier said than done. Identifying the emotion. This is great with kids because we're starting to build up their emotional vocabulary, but also with adults. When you identify the emotion, it's also an opportunity to make sure you're getting it right and understanding, and for them to say, no, I'm not sad, I'm really angry, or, because that would require different types of support. And then you want to connect with and communicate the emotion. And like she said, this is difficult work because it is vulnerable work. In order to connect with you, I have to get in touch with a part of myself that knows that feeling. Even if we've had completely different experiences, we don't have to have identical experiences for me to feel empathy towards you. And that's why it's so, so important that we have some self-awareness around our own experiences of loss and adversity and grief, because these will influence how we show up for others. So we all have fallen into the trap of what we call habitual non-empathic responses. They are well-intended responses that can do more harm than good. I think we've all found ourselves in this moment of, I gotta say something, and we fall into some of these traps, of giving unsolicited advice, of one-upping. I'm sure you've all been in that situation where you're like, there's this thing that's happening and I'm really worried, and someone goes, oh, wait till you hear what happened to me, the main character. We could fall into educating, consoling. Storytelling is a complicated one because sometimes we want to share our story to show that we understand and to connect with the other person. But you have to be careful because you might be shining that spotlight on you rather than on the person that came to you. Shutting down, again, that's our own discomfort. Sympathizing, like we saw in the video. Interrogating, doesn't feel good to get a ton of questions thrown at you at once. Explaining or correcting. And I don't share any of these to make anybody feel bad. We've all done it. This is my actual job. And I found myself at leasting another person. But things like, I know how you feel. Well, this could turn out to be a positive for you, the silver lining. Everything happens for a reason. God or higher power has a plan for you. At least, got that at least, they are no longer suffering. You will get better with time, or you will find someone else. I just know it. And all of these are an attempt to very quickly fix the pain and make it better, and to altogether avoid these difficult conversations. But I'm not going to leave you hanging. This is also going to be a handout, but I wanted to give you a few prompts to help you be more empathic and more supportive when dealing with grief, grievers, or just folks in your lives who are going through a hard time. So you want to acknowledge and ask supportive questions. I'm so sorry to hear about blank. What can I do to support you? So saying I'm sorry is not off the table. We say it all the time here. Validate and express that you care. I imagine this has to be incredibly difficult. I want you to know that I care about you and I want to support you. And be authentic and communicate presence. Remember, they came to you because they want support from you. But it's okay to not have all the answers. I don't even know what to say right now, but I want you to know I'm here for you. Remember, the foundation on which we build resilience in our programs is based on these 2 things: the supportive relationships and that opportunity to learn adaptive skills and see them modeled by others around you. You have everything you need to be that supportive person, that supportive relationship to a person who is grieving. So just to recap some strategies, we want to withhold from the need to fix it, respond with empathy by connecting with what they're feeling, practice listening and using clear language, and focus on those supportive relationships and adaptive skills. So today's topics, we wanted to raise some awareness around good grief. We wanted to sort of broaden our definition around grief and loss and some of their impacts, look at the multidimensional nature of the grief experience, and share some strategies for responding with empathy and compassion. I do have just a few things here. I want to do our closing ritual before we get into any reflections and sort of upcoming webinars and things like that for anyone that might need to hop off. So here is a closing ritual. This is from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. You might know her from the 5 Stages of Grief. She wrote a groundbreaking book on death and dying in 1969 at a time when nobody was talking about death and dying. She did amazing work with patients who had received a terminal diagnosis. And she said, the most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with a compassion, gentleness, and a deep loving concern. Beautiful people do not just happen. And you all did not just happen. So thank you so much for your time and your attention today. We do have a few upcoming webinars. I could share the links with you all. Next month, we're doing one on grief after sudden loss. We have our Spring Institute coming up in March on grief and addiction. In May, we have a poet and author who will be working with us on grief poetry. And in June, we have a session on grief journaling. And this is us, good-grief.org/resources, our YouTube page. I'm Evelynn with 2 N's, if you ever need to reach out. And yes, if you have any questions or any reflections, happy to be here and answer them.
Thank you so much, Evelynn. And some praise is coming into the chat. I did not notice any questions pop up through the chat, but I'm going to scroll through it again. But yes, if anyone wants to unmute or type to ask anything or to share your experience, I certainly was going through some reflections while you were going through. So that's a good feeling on the back end of it. But I'm just going to not say anything for a second if anyone else wants to take over.
We all have to learn listening skills. Like I said, this is my actual job, is to train people to be empathic and to be good listeners. And I still fall into some of those traps, but it's okay. You know, it's never too late to go back when I find myself giving a non-empathic response or maybe not listening as well as I should. There's always that pause, and there's power in the pause because you can choose how you're going to show up at any moment.
That is very true. Thank you again so much. And there's just mostly praise coming into the chat. We've got one question. Can you share a little, Evelynn, about what this training involves?
Our facilitator training. So our facilitator training is for folks who want to come to Good Grief and volunteer to work with our children and families. Our nights of support, we have about 2 to 3 facilitators per room. So our facilitators are never alone with the grievers. Our youngest kids need more support. So the 3 to 5-year-olds is our smallest group with the most adults in it for reasons I'm sure you all understand. And our facilitators come for a 4-day long experience. So it's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, about 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., although I do try to get them out earlier. And the first part of the training is really focused on their own self-awareness and their relationship to their losses, because we really want them to get in touch with that before they get in front of people sharing their grief stories. Because once our volunteers land in the space with our young people and with our families, they are not there to process their grief. They're there to create space for other people. But we do want to provide that training opportunity for them to really examine their relationship to grief and loss, because some people will discover they're ready or they're not ready, or maybe they need other supports or therapy or a trusted friend that they can unpack these things with in order to be present with our kids and with our families. So we spend a lot of time looking at grief and grief theories, facilitation, listening. We get back in touch with our inner child, because kids process a lot through play. You have to be ready to get your hands in the sand table, to get into our medical play area, and you might die on the operating room table with these children. You never know. They might have a funeral for you. And we want people to feel ready for that. Doing art again, finger painting. We do all of that because we want to really prepare folks as best as possible to be support for our children and for our families. So it's a really great training. I wish I could bring it to everyone, everywhere, whether they were going to volunteer or not.
That's very true. I know I have been always impressed when I hear you talk about this group, and I do truly believe that what your mission is does help a lot of people. I just want to give a teaser to you all. Good Grief will be joining NJALA at Mercer County Community College on June 6th. That's when we're having our in-person event. So if you enjoyed this, you'll get to hear a bit more about the organization or meet Evelynn in person, which we're all excited to get together as a group again. You can still ask questions, raise your hand, or type in the chat. Otherwise, since we're nearing the top of the hour, I'm just going to tease a bit more of the programs that are coming up. So you can join me next Thursday, the 2nd at 10 a.m. and I will be showing some tricks on how to optimize your Google Chrome browser. Then later in February, on the 22nd at 2 p.m., we're going to have Change in Your Brain, which is presented by Lynn Hoffman, and it's going over the SCARF method. If you've never heard of that, it is a really, really cool way to learn about yourself and how you perceive other people. Then March 2nd, we're going to have an overview about how to use Google Sheets. And again, that in-person conference is returning on June 6th at Mercer County Community College, and we are going to have more information about how to register coming up very soon. So I'm going to stop the recording